This week, from our campsite in peaceful Mossy Rock Park, operated by Tacoma Power, come along as we visit two vastly different mountains. The majestic Mount Rainier, at 14,500 feet, is the tallest peak in Washington state and dominates the horizon in all directions. And Mount St. Helens, where devastation is still clearly visible after its massive eruption way back in 1980. Mount Rainier National Park is only about an 80-mile drive from the population centers in the Seattle area, and as a result, backups like this at the entrance are common. When we first stopped, the sign at the side of the road said up to 1 hour wait from this spot. In our case, we passed through the entrance gate in about 40 minutes. Not too bad considering we had a poorly planned late morning arrival. Shortly after passing through the entrance, we pulled off for a short hike at this loop trail. After sitting in line, it was nice to get out for a bit and enjoy nature. At the turnaround point, we were rewarded with our first clear view of Mount Rainier. On the way back to the trailhead, we began to wonder where everyone was. We only saw a couple of other hikers on the trail, but there was that long line at the entrance. As we returned to the truck, we saw the steady stream of cars driving past. It finally occurred to us that they were all heading to the visitor center at the end of the road, so we decided to delay our planned stops to the return trip and head up to Paradise Visitor Center before all the parking spots were taken. Good idea, right? Notice the line of cars on the left streaming past the sign? Here's a quick shot of some of the crowd at the visitor center. I didn't get a video of the parking lots themselves, but this section of video, which is sped up to 10 times actual speed, shows that cars were parked along the road well past the visitor center. We were still able to get some great views of the mountain. Certainly the best glacial views we've had since visiting Alaska last year. On the way out of the park, we stopped at the Narda Falls Overlook. A short but steep downhill hike provided this view of the falls, dropping about 160 feet onto the rocks below. If you look carefully, you might be able to spot the rainbow being formed in the mist. Back at the campsite, it was time to sit back and let the surrounding beauty soak in before heading out to Mount St. Helens the next day. On May 18, 1980, Mount St. Helens erupted with a force greater than any other event in modern American history. In a matter of minutes, the mountain's north face collapsed, unleashing a massive landslide, a towering plume of ash, and a blast that leveled everything for miles. Forests were flattened, rivers were choked with mud and debris, more than 50 lives were lost. I had visited the mountain in 1990 and can vividly remember the devastation visible then, 10 years after the eruption. What will we see now, some 45 years after the eruption? Unfortunately, the Johnston Ridge Visitor Center, which is just 4 miles from the mountain, is unreachable due to a massive landslide which occurred in 2023. The Park Service continues to work to reconstruct the road, but in the meantime, our initial view was from the Coldwater Ridge Visitor Center, some 10 miles further away. The combination of this location and the low cloud cover worked to deny us a clear view of the mountain. One other option was to drive up to Windy Ridge and the Donnybrook viewpoint to get a better view of the northwest and most devastated area. Not many people make this 3.5-hour round trip thanks to a bridge being out of the main road up to the viewpoint and detours along these very narrow, quite bumpy Forest Service roads for several miles in order to gain access to the main route. The ranger I spoke with described the main road as a bit sketchy. Look carefully along the left side of the road as we drive along, and you can see evidence of the road beginning to slide down the mountainside. Why it is still open to the public is a mystery to me, but I'm glad it was. Once we arrived at the Donnybrook viewpoint, we could go no further thanks to another landslide. The weather still wasn't really cooperating, but I was able to capture a sense of the massive devastation. Everywhere you look, there is a sense of destruction and isolation. This area is not often visited, and the condition of the grounds only adds to that feeling. Here is a view of Spirit Lake, where trees that were blown down by the eruption are still visible at one end. So much ash and debris fell into the lake that Spirit Lake is now about 200 feet higher in elevation than it was before the eruption. On some mountainsides, evidence still exists of entire forests being blown down by the blast. Look carefully, you can still see trees laying on the ground, all in the same direction. Remember, this was filmed some 45 years after the eruption. About 8.5 miles from the mountain, we stopped at the famous miner's car. 3 people had ignored days of warning and drove into the area to inspect their mining claim. They were 3 out of a total of 57 people that lost their lives the day of the eruption. It was beginning to get late into the day, so we returned to camp the way we came. Although it was a long and very bumpy drive, there is very little traffic. Once we return home from this summer's trip, I hope to find the photos I took during my visit to Mount St. Helens back in 1990. If I can find them, I'll post another video to compare the changes. Subscribe to the channel to be notified when that video is completed. After returning to camp, we learned that there was what geologists call an earthquake swarm inside of Mount Rainier about 2 weeks prior to our visit. Was that a prelude of things to come? Continue to follow along as we head back towards the coast for a couple of weeks to explore the Olympic Peninsula and the Olympic National Park. Thanks for watching.